Jerk didn't even look up when he said it, just flicked his hand dismissively toward the stack of documents he wanted me to retype for the third time that week. Relax, you're just a secretary, Maurice. This stuff is above your pay grade. The conference room went completely still. Half the directors around that polished table stared at me like I suddenly belonged on a different floor, lower, somewhere out of sight where I wouldn't embarrass them with my presence. My cheeks burned so hot I felt dizzy, like all the blood in my body had rushed to my face at once. He'd said it loudly, deliberately, right after I'd quietly corrected a significant financial error he'd made in his presentation. An error that would have cost the company thousands if it had gone through. And when I didn't move fast enough to collect his papers like some kind of servant, he added under his breath, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Some people should know their lane. That was the moment something inside me snapped, not loudly, not visibly, but quietly. A clean, precise break. The kind that doesn't bleed immediately. The kind that plans, the kind that waits. My name is Maurice Talden, and at the time this happened, I was the person who kept Jerk's entire department breathing. I managed his calendar down to the minute, drafted his communications so he'd sound competent, tracked his deadlines so he'd never miss one, and cleaned up his reports before they went to upper management. He relied on me more than he would ever admit to anyone, including himself. I'd been in that position for 3 years, watching him take credit for work I'd done, listening to him dismiss my ideas only to present them as his own weeks later. But humiliation has a way of making you see power differently. It makes you start noticing who really runs things and who only pretends to. As I walked out of that conference room, still shaking with rage and shame, my arms full of papers he'd thrown at me like I was nothing, I didn't know it yet. But that was the day I started taking my future back, one quiet, strategic move at a time. That was the day I stopped being invisible. I noticed something as I left that room, though. One of the directors, Evander, a man I'd only interacted with in passing, was watching Jerk with an expression I couldn't quite read. Discomfort, almost guilt. His eyes met mine briefly, and there was something there. Understanding, maybe, or recognition of an injustice. But he said nothing, and I hurried out before anyone could see the tears threatening to spill over. Back at my desk, I sat down and tried to steady my breathing, tried to push down the humiliation that was threatening to consume me. I'd been patient for years. I'd told myself that hard work would eventually be recognized, that keeping my head down and doing excellent work would speak for itself. But Jerk had just shown me exactly what he thought of my work, my contributions, and my worth. As I was organizing the disaster of papers he'd handed me, I noticed something on my desk that hadn't been there before. A small yellow sticky note placed carefully on my keyboard. The message was brief. "You deserved better than that." No name, no signature, just those 5 words that made my throat tight. An hour later, Jerk called me into his office through the intercom, his voice casual like absolutely nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just humiliated me in front of the entire senior leadership team. I walked in to find him leaning back in his leather chair, feet up on his desk, scrolling through his phone. "I need you to reorganize these quarterly reports," he said without looking up, gesturing to a massive pile of folders on his desk. "I'll need the Henderson analysis redone. Their numbers don't look right." The Henderson analysis was his work, his calculations, his projections. But of course, if something was wrong, it would somehow become my responsibility to fix. I nodded silently, gathering the folders. My hands were steady now, my mind already calculating. As I turned to leave, I glanced at his computer setup. He had 2 monitors, and on the second one, partially hidden by his desk lamp, was an open file. I could only see part of the header, but the words internal audit and financial discrepancies were clearly visible. He noticed me looking and quickly minimized the window, his casual demeanor slipping for just a second. That flicker of worry told me everything I needed to know. The next day, I was organizing files in the records room when I overheard 2 financial analysts talking in the hallway just outside the door. They didn't know I was there, didn't know anyone could hear them. "The restructuring is definitely happening," one of them said, voice low. "Upper management is looking at every department head. Jerk thinks he's untouchable, but he's actually on thin ice." My heart started beating faster. "Really?" the other analyst replied. "He seems so confident." "That's because he doesn't know what the auditors found. If certain numbers get exposed, the inflated projections, the misallocated budget items, he's done. They moved away down the hallway, their voices fatting, but I stood frozen in that records room, my mind racing. Jerk was vulnerable, more vulnerable than he appeared, and he had no idea. I thought about that confidential file I'd glimpsed on his monitor. About all the times I'd noticed small discrepancies in his reports that I'd quietly fixed without mentioning. About all the shortcuts he took, assuming no one would notice or care. I'd been protecting him for years without even realizing it. And now I had information. Information was power. That afternoon, Director Evander, the man who'd looked uncomfortable during my humiliation, stopped by my desk. "Maurice, could you bring the Clemson project files to my office?" he asked politely. It was unusual. Directors typically sent their own assistants for such things. When I arrived at his office with the files, he closed the door behind me and gestured for me to sit. "I want to apologize," he said quietly, "for what happened yesterday. What Jerk said to you was completely inappropriate and unprofessional. You didn't deserve that treatment." I was so surprised by his directness that I didn't know how to respond. "Jerk shouldn't be leading anyone," he continued, his voice firm. "And I'm not the only person on the board who thinks so." He studied me for a moment, seeming to make some kind of decision. "Maurice, I've watched you work for 3 years. You run that entire department. You know it better than Jerk does. So I have to ask you something." He paused. "Have you ever considered running something yourself, actually leading instead of just supporting someone else's leadership?" The question hit me like cold water. Me? Leading? I'd never even considered it. But as I sat there, looking at Evander's serious expression, something shifted. Why not me? I went home that night completely shaken. I'd spent years thinking my role was to support, to facilitate, to make others look good. I'd been the invisible force that kept everything running smoothly, and I'd told myself that was enough. That being indispensable was its own form of power. But Evander's question had unlocked something. Why not me? I knew every aspect of that department. I understood the projects better than Jerk did, because I was the one actually tracking them, managing them, fixing them when they went wrong. I saw every weakness Jerk had, every shortcut he took, every gap I filled without acknowledgement, every report I essentially wrote for him while he took credit. I'd been covering for his incompetence so effectively that even the board didn't realize how little he actually did. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, still turning these thoughts over in my mind when my laptop chimed with a new email. It was from Evander, sent from his personal email address, not the company system. The subject line read, "Opportunity." The message was brief. "We should talk. I have a proposition for you. Are you free for coffee tomorrow morning before work?" My hands trembled as I typed my response. "Yes." We met at a quiet cafe 3 blocks from the office. Evander was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth away from other patrons. He got straight to the point. "The company is launching a new internal program," he explained. "Leadership Apprenticeship. It's designed to identify talented employees who have been overlooked for advancement and fast-track them into management roles. I want to sponsor you for it." My coffee sat untouched in front of me as I processed his words. "But Jerk would have no say in it," Evander interrupted. "This program bypasses normal departmental hierarchies. You'd report directly to the Executive Development Committee. You'd be training for a director-level position." It sounded too good to be true. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you're already doing the work," he said simply. "You just don't have the title or the recognition. But here's the thing, Maurice. If we're going to make this work, if we're going to convince the committee that you're ready for leadership, you'll need to prove something." He leaned forward. "You'll need proof of what Jerk's been hiding. Documentation of his incompetence, his shortcuts, his failures that you've been covering up. Can you do that?" Over the next 2 weeks, I became hyper-aware of everything Jerk did. I watched him like I'd never watched anyone before, but now I was seeing him through different eyes. Not as my boss whose approval I needed, but as a subject to study. I noticed how he inflated projections in reports to make his performance look better than it was. How he missed deadlines and then blamed other people, usually me, for the delays. How he showed blatant favoritism to certain team members while being casually cruel to others. How he redirected budget allocations without proper documentation. I started keeping copies of everything. Every email where he took credit for my work. Every report where I could prove the analysis was mine, not his. Every instance of him overriding my corrections and making costly errors. Every meeting where he dismissed valuable input from team members. I discovered a file he'd forgotten to properly secure on the shared drive, a draft budget proposal with numbers that didn't match the official version he'd submitted. The discrepancies weren't small. Someone had deliberately manipulated the figures to hide overspending in his department, and Jerk's digital signature was all over it. Instead of confronting him, which is what the old Maris would have done, the Maris who still believed in good faith and honest communication, I played a longer game. I acted more submissive than ever, more compliant, more invisible. I apologized for things that weren't my fault. I accepted his criticism without defending myself. I made him feel comfortable again. Too comfortable. One afternoon, I was in his office organizing files while he took a phone call. He thought I wasn't paying attention, absorbed in my work, but I heard everything. "The board will believe whatever I put in front of them," he said to whoever was on the other end, his voice full of smug confidence. "I've been manipulating these numbers for 2 years and nobody's noticed. They're all idiots." He laughed, the sound making my stomach turn. "My assistant, she's too scared of me to say anything, and even if she tried, who would believe her?" I kept my face neutral, kept filing papers like I'd heard nothing. But inside, a cold fury was crystallizing into something harder, something unbreakable. That night, I sent Evander a detailed email with timestamps, file comparisons, and a very clear timeline of Jerk's deceptions. Jerk must have sensed something shifting, even if he couldn't identify what. Maybe he noticed me being quieter than usual. Maybe some instinct warned him that I wasn't as beaten down as I appeared. He started trying to undermine me in small ways. Files I needed access to suddenly showed, permission denied, errors. My name was left off email chains I'd always been included in. During a team meeting, he made a comment about how some people think they're more important than they are while looking directly at me. But then something strange happened. The IT department sent me an email. "Per your request, your higher-level system access has been installed. You now have permissions for director-level files and archives. Let us know if you have any questions." I stared at that email in confusion. I hadn't requested any access changes. I immediately suspected Jerk had set up some kind of trap, some way to accuse me of overstepping. But then Evander appeared at my desk. "Did you get the IT email?" he asked quietly. I nodded, showing him the message on my screen. "I authorized it," he said. "You'll need access to certain files for your leadership application, and besides, you're about to outgrow this place. We should start preparing you." Evander handed me a folder when we met for lunch that week. "Executive Development Application," the label read. "This is your official entry into the program," he explained. "Fill it out carefully. You'll need to include a leadership philosophy statement, a detailed account of your professional accomplishments, and a proposal for how you'd restructure your current department if given the authority." That last requirement felt significant. Would I be restructuring Jerk's department? I asked carefully. "Let's just say the company is evaluating all departments for efficiency and leadership effectiveness," Evander replied, his expression neutral. "Your proposal would be theoretical, but theoretical proposals have a way of becoming real when circumstances align." Over the next week, I worked on that application every evening after work. I poured everything into it, not just my accomplishments, but a complete analysis of where the department was failing and why. I documented inefficiencies. I identified redundant processes that could be eliminated. I proposed new accountability structures that would prevent the kind of credit stealing and blame shifting that Jerk practiced constantly. It was, in essence, a detailed indictment of his leadership disguised as a forward-looking proposal. When I finally submitted it to the Executive Development Committee, I felt like I'd launched something I couldn't take back. Then Jerk humiliated me again. A critical report was late, a report he'd forgotten to approve despite my 3 reminder emails. But instead of acknowledging his mistake, he called me out during an all-staff meeting in front of the entire floor. "This is exactly the kind of incompetence I'm talking about," he said, his voice carrying across the open office space. "Maris was responsible for getting this report to the client, and she failed. This is unacceptable." I stood there with dozens of eyes on me, my face burning, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I could have defended myself. I could have pulled up those reminder emails right there, shown everyone that this was his failure, not mine. But I said nothing. I'd learned by now that defending yourself against someone like Jerk only made you look defensive, only made you look guilty. So I took it. I absorbed his public shamming. And then I went back to my desk and added this incident to my detailed documentation file. From across the office, I saw Evander standing in his doorway. He'd watched the entire thing. Our eyes met, and I saw something in his expression that made my breath catch. Anger. He was angry on my behalf. That afternoon, I received an email from him. Board meeting in 6 days. Are you ready? Word about the restructuring started spreading through the office like wildfire. The rumors grew more specific. Departments would be evaluated, leadership positions would be reviewed, changes were coming. Jerk became increasingly paranoid. His temper grew shorter. He snapped at people over minor issues. He held impromptu meetings where he lectured everyone about loyalty and dedication. But he suspected nothing about me. To him, I was still just the secretary. Still just the invisible support system he could abuse without consequence. One afternoon, he called me into his office and closed the door. "I need you to do something," he said, his voice tense. He gestured to several bankers' boxes stacked in the corner. "These are old project files, some documentation that's no longer relevant. I need you to shred all of it, everything. Don't sort through it, don't read it, just shred it all." My heart started racing. All of it. I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "All of it," he confirmed. "Today, I want it done before you leave." I nodded obediently and began carrying the boxes to the document room, but I didn't shred anything. Not yet. In the privacy of the locked document room, I went through every single file in those boxes. What I found was damning. Old budget reports showing discrepancies between what Jerk reported to the board and what was actually spent. Emails proving he'd taken credit for other people's work. Documentation of projects that failed because of his decisions, but where he'd blamed team members in his official reports. Performance reviews where he deliberately sabotaged good employees' ratings because they'd questioned his authority. This wasn't just evidence of incompetence. This was evidence of systematic fraud and abuse. I understood now why he wanted it all destroyed. An audit would destroy him. My hands shook as I photographed every single page with my phone. Then I uploaded everything to a secure cloud storage account. Then I scanned the most critical documents using the office scanner, sending them to my personal email. Only after I had multiple backups of everything did I feed the physical papers through the shredder. When Jerk checked on me an hour later, all he saw was an empty document room and bags of shredded paper. "Good," he said, satisfied. "You did exactly what I told you to do." I smiled at him. Always. That evening, I met with Evander at his home office, a beautiful study lined with bookshelves and warmed by a fireplace. "Are you ready?" he asked. "The board meets in 4 days. You'll need to present your leadership application proposal to the executive committee." Over the next several evenings, Evander coached me. We practiced my presentation over and over. He taught me how to project confidence without arrogance, how to present criticism of current structures without seeming petty or vindictive. "You're not attacking Jerk," he reminded me repeatedly. "You're identifying systemic problems and proposing solutions. Stay professional. Stay focused on the future, not past grievances." We worked on my posture, my tone of voice, my eye contact. He recorded me giving practice presentations and made me watch myself, critiquing every nervous habit and hesitation. "You know this material better than anyone," he said. "You've been doing this work for years. Now you just need to own it. Stand up there and show them the leader you've always been." By the third evening, something had shifted. I watched myself in the recording and barely recognized the woman on screen. She stood straight. She spoke clearly. She commanded the room. She looked like someone who should be giving orders, not taking them. On the morning of my presentation to the executive committee, I ran into Jerk in the elevator. He was heading up to the executive floor for some meeting, and I was going to the same floor to meet with Evander one last time before my presentation that afternoon. "What are you doing up here?" Jerk asked, his tone suspicious. "Director Evander requested some files," I said smoothly. "I'm just delivering them." He studied me for a long moment, and I could see his mind working, trying to piece something together. We'd been in the elevator together countless times over the years, but this time felt different. This time, he was looking at me like he was really seeing me for the first time. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor, and we both stepped out. Evander was waiting in the hallway, and his face brightened when he saw me. "Maurice, perfect timing. Come on back." Jerk's expression changed instantly, suspicion igniting into something sharper, more dangerous. That afternoon, he called me into his office, and this time he locked the door behind me. "We need to talk," he said, his voice cold. Jerk circled around his desk to stand in front of me, deliberately using his height to intimidate. "I know you've been talking to Evander," he said. "I know you're ambitious. I've seen the way you look at people in this building, like you think you deserve something more than what you have." My heart was pounding, but I kept my face neutral. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play games with me," he snapped. "You're trying to sabotage me. You think you can go behind my back, undermine my authority, make me look bad to the board. But let me make something very clear, Maurice. You are nothing in this company without me. I could fire you right now and nobody would question it. Nobody would care." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something more menacing. "So whatever little scheme you and Evander are cooking up, whatever ideas you've gotten in your head about advancement or recognition or revenge, I suggest you forget them. Otherwise, you won't just lose this job. I'll make sure you never work in this industry again." The old Maurice would have crumbled under that threat, but I wasn't the old Maurice anymore. I looked him straight in the eyes and said calmly, "Then you should make sure your numbers are perfect." His face went pale. "What did you just say?" I didn't answer his question. I simply turned and walked out of his office, my hands surprisingly steady. 2 days later, the company announced a full internal audit. The email from the CFO went to every employee. "As part of our ongoing commitment to transparency and accountability, we'll be conducting a comprehensive review of all departmental finances, project outcomes, and management practices. This is a standard procedure and should not cause concern. Your cooperation is appreciated." Jerk spiraled. He became frantic, desperate, working late into the night trying to reconstruct files, trying to explain away discrepancies. He forced the entire team into overtime, having us pull old records, reorganize documentation, prepare reports justifying every expenditure and decision from the past 3 years. I watched him unravel day by day. The smug confidence evaporated, replaced by wild-eyed paranoia. He snapped at everyone. Second-guessed every decision. He stopped sleeping. I could see it in his face, the exhaustion and fear. And through it all, I played the perfect assistant. Helpful, organized, efficient. When he asked me to find certain files, I found them. When he needed data compiled, I compiled it. And every single thing I gave him, I also quietly shared with Evander. The final piece of evidence, those documents he'd tried to have me destroy, I sent to Evander in a single encrypted email. "Everything you need." The auditors worked quickly. Within a week, they'd uncovered enough irregularities to warrant deeper investigation. Jerk was called into a closed session with the auditors and 2 senior executives. When he emerged 2 hours later, his face was red, his collar drenched with sweat. His hands were shaking. He went straight to his office and slammed the door. Through the glass walls, I could see him packing, running his hands through his hair, making frantic phone calls. An hour later, he burst out of his office, wild-eyed. "Maurice!" he shouted across the floor. "Maurice, get in here now." But my desk was empty, because I wasn't there. I was upstairs, in the executive boardroom, standing in front of the leadership committee with Evander beside me, about to present my leadership application proposal. About to tell them everything I knew about how Jerk's department really functioned, and how it could function better under different leadership. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My voice was steady. And when I looked around that boardroom at those powerful executives, I didn't see people who were above me. I saw people who needed to hear what I had to say. I presented for 45 minutes. I walked them through my analysis of the department's inefficiencies, its leadership failures, its unrealized potential. I showed them data they'd never seen before, real data, not the manipulated versions Jerk had been feeding them for years. I demonstrated how processes could be streamlined, how accountability could be improved, how team morale and productivity could be dramatically increased under a different management structure. I was calm, factual, professional, unshakable. I answered every question they asked with specific examples and clear evidence. I never once mentioned Jerk by name, but everyone in that room knew exactly what I was really talking about. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then the CEO leaned forward. "Ms. Talden, This is one of the most thorough and insightful proposals I've seen from anyone at any level in this company. Your understanding of these operations is exceptional." "Thank you," I said simply. "We'll be making a decision about the executive development program slots by tomorrow morning," the CFO added. "But I want you to know that this committee is very impressed by what we've seen today." As I left that boardroom with Evander, I finally allowed myself to breathe. "You were perfect," he said quietly. "Absolutely perfect." I smiled. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. That night, Jerk made his biggest mistake. Panicked and desperate, he sent an email to the entire executive floor, everyone who'd been in that boardroom, plus other senior leaders. The subject line read, "Concerns about employee Maurice Talden." In the email, he accused me of incompetence, insubordination, and attempting to sabotage his department. He claimed I was manipulating information to make him look bad, that I was bitter about being just a secretary, that I was spreading lies to advance my own career. He called me ungrateful, disloyal, and unprofessional. The email was 3 pages long, full of personal attacks and wild accusations. It was desperate, unhinged, the exact opposite of the calm, professional proposal I'd presented just hours earlier, and every single executive on that distribution list read it. The CEO forwarded it to HR with a single line, "This is unacceptable. Please address immediately." HR forwarded it to me with a different message. "Ms. Talden, you may want to be present in the office at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. The executive committee would like to speak with you." I read Jerk's email 3 times, and instead of fear or anger, I felt something else entirely. Relief, because he'd just proven everything I'd been saying about his leadership, his judgment, and his character. He'd destroyed himself more thoroughly than I ever could have. At 8 the next morning, I arrived at the executive floor wearing my best suit. The CFO and the head of HR were waiting in a conference room. "Ms. Talden, please have a seat," the CFO said. "I want to start by apologizing on behalf of the company. The email you received last night was completely inappropriate and unprofessional. We take workplace harassment very seriously, and Director Vaughn's conduct has been unacceptable." The head of HR opened a folder. "Our investigation, which began with the routine audit but accelerated significantly after yesterday's events, has uncovered extensive evidence of financial misconduct, fraudulent reporting, workplace harassment, and abuse of authority. Director Vaughn has been terminated effective immediately for fraud, misconduct, and misuse of company resources." My breath caught. "He's being escorted from the building by security as we speak," the HR director continued. "He will not be returning to collect personal items. Those will be boxed and shipped to him. Additionally," the CFO said, "the executive committee was deeply impressed by your presentation yesterday. Your understanding of departmental operations, your strategic thinking, and your professionalism stand in stark contrast to the environment you've been working in." She smiled slightly. "We'd like to discuss your future with this company." The CFO slid a document across the table to me. "We'd like to offer you the interim director position for what was formerly Jerk's department. This is a probationary period, but if your performance matches what we saw in your proposal, the position will become permanent within 6 months." The salary they named was more than double what I'd been making as a secretary. The benefits package included things I'd only dreamed about: professional development funds, executive health insurance, a performance bonus structure. "You'll have authority to restructure the department as you outlined in your proposal," the HR director added. "You'll report directly to the CFO, and you'll have full autonomy in hearing, budgeting, and strategic planning." I looked at Evander, who was sitting quietly in the corner of the room. He was smiling at me like he'd known this would happen all along. Like this had always been the plan. "I accept," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Excellent," the CFO said, standing to shake my hand. "Welcome to leadership, Director Talden." Director Talden, the title echoed in my mind like something out of a dream, except this wasn't a dream. This was real. This was earned. The HR director pushed another document across the table. "Your new compensation package. Please review and sign when you're ready." 6 months later, I sat in my new office, the same office that used to be Jerk's, looking out over the city. Everything had changed. I'd restructured the entire department exactly as I'd proposed. I'd eliminated the redundant processes that had existed only to make Jerk look busy. I'd implemented new accountability measures that ensured credit went to the people who actually did the work. I'd hired 2 new team members to replace people Jarek had driven away with his toxicity. Projects that had been languishing for months were suddenly moving forward. The quarterly reports showed measurable improvement in productivity and efficiency. Team morale was higher than it had been in years. I knew because HR conducted an anonymous survey, and the results were overwhelmingly positive. I'd become what Jarek had called impossible, a secretary who became a director. Someone who'd been told to know her lane had created an entirely new road. I never contacted Jarek after his termination. Never gloated, never reached out, never even thought about him except when I had to explain to new hires why certain dysfunctional processes had existed before. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't confrontation or victory declarations. It was simply thriving, living well, building something better. I wasn't just a secretary. I'd never been just anything. I was the person holding an entire structure together. And all I needed to do was stop holding him up and start lifting myself instead. I'd taken my future back, one quiet strategic move at a time, and I was just getting started.